Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the 37th Annual Economic Roundtable. I'm Daniel Ennemark. I'm the Senior Economist at San Diego Workforce Partnership, and I'll be moderating a panel later today and a Q&A session. I have just a couple housekeeping items before we start. Feel free to use the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. We'll have a Q&A session at the very end. And then also, please feel free to use the chat function to interact with other attendees. I'm now going to hand it over to Nathan Fletcher, chair of the San Diego County Board of Supervisors, to kick us off. Supervisor Fletcher, thank you so much for being here. I'm sure your schedule is very open in this politically uneventful season.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. Yeah, it has been quite a year last year for our region. Obviously, the public health impact, the economic impacts, which have been significant and severe. And so I'm really, it's my privilege and honor to kick off the 37th annual County of San Diego Economic Roundtable, and I appreciate everyone participating. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from everyone who is here about what the future holds, or what you believe the future holds, and the options for where we go and how we come back. I think it's vitally important as we are still in a response phase to COVID, but are preparing for recovery, that we really think very intentionally about the recovery and the rebuild phase. And that's where I think the Economic Roundtable can serve an incredibly valuable component for our region as we think about this. This is the longest running free local economic forecasting event in San Diego County, and has grown into the incredible forum that he is with so many experts. Here today, you have economists, industry experts, business leaders from various sectors. And again, I'm particularly excited to hear from the panelists about what 2021 looks like. I want to thank our partners who are part of planning this for their partnership and their work. San Diego Workforce Partnership, an entity I've been pleased to spend the last 2 years on their board of directors. San Diego Union Tribune, our paper of record here in San Diego County, the San Diego Regional Chamber of Commerce, and last, but really importantly, the globally ranked University of San Diego School of Business. And I know how important the investment in education and higher education is to economic development. Before we kick it over to Jeff Light, I think as we've looked at COVID, we've talked a lot about the disparities that COVID has shown. Latinos being 30% of the population, but almost 60% of the positive cases. Well, that's true on the public health side, but that's also true on the economic side. There is no doubt that COVID-19 has had negative economic impacts. That is obvious and painfully clear. But it's also clear that those negative impacts have not been across the board. Some sectors have been absolutely decimated. Our tourism, our tourism sectors, our hospitality sectors, certainly our restaurant industries and our hotels. And then other sectors have had record years and stunning success. And so at a time when I think we added a record number of new billionaires in the United States in 2020, with that category of folks adding $1 trillion of new wealth in 2020, we also saw so many folks who were devastated. And I think addressing that issue and ensuring that as we rebuild and recover, we do it in a smart, intentional way, in a very focused way that is looking forward. And so I'm really interested to hear from folks about where the opportunities lie. What do you think will fundamentally change in the nature of our economy? 9/11 happened. We never got on an airplane the same way again. What are the things we think that will be lasting impacts of COVID? And how do we position ourselves as a region to be economically strong in that environment? What do we need to do to be a place that's positioned on the front end of tourism? If there's going to be less travel and tourism and conferences, then how do we make us the place that people choose to go? If people are going to move more into remote work, and that's going to be at some level, not the level it is today, some level sustaining, how do we tackle issues of housing affordability so people could choose to live in a wonderful place like San Diego if they can choose to live anywhere and do their job? How do we take advantage of the incoming Biden administration to make sure the largest driver of our economy, our military and defense industry, continues to have that pivot to the West and we get more resources here? And then how do we seize the spin-off opportunities that come out of that industry and things that are unique to our geography, like the blue economy and other things where we do have a competitive advantage? How do we look at the mega region, which includes the economic engine to the south of us as we move into a new era with a new posture and mindset, I think, of U.S.-Mexico relationships and opportunities that exist there. Obviously, the biotech industry being one of the anchors in the technology sector. How do we enhance that and how do we grow that and really do more around that? And then how do we build out the San Diego County that this younger generation of workers who are very creative, are very entrepreneurial, are also very mobile, the type of folks who will choose a place they want to live and then figure out how to put their creativity to work in that place. How do we build out the culture and the ecosystem, the society, the transit systems, the type of environment where they want to be here in San Diego, growing and doing. And I think those are a lot of things that can guide policymakers as we listen and learn from all of you. And so I'm thrilled to kick you off, and again, very excited to hear the feedback and the information and direction, recognizing that it has been a devastating economic year. And it's going to take us some time, and taking the only comfort I think we can take is these pandemics at this scope tend to only happen once every 100 years. So hopefully we can truly build back better and be in a better position. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Jeff Light. Jeff is the publisher and editor of the San Diego Union Tribune. He has worked for the newspaper and websites for more than 3 decades. He joined the Union Tribune as the top editor in March of 2010. Jeff was made publisher of the paper in 2016. Jeff is an incredibly unique individual in that he's got left and right brain, and they are both high functioning. Both aspects of that are incredibly high functioning. He has degrees in poetry, and he has degrees in business administration. And I think that gives him a unusual level of analytical creativity and leadership. San Diegans are fortunate to have Jeff very involved in the community boards of the Symphony, San Diego Partnership, Smart Border Coalition, and so much. So with that, it's my privilege to introduce to you all Jeff Light.
Excellent. Thank you, Nathan. Oh, excuse me, everybody, while I adjust my my Zoom room here that we're all living in. Super kind introduction from a person of great accomplishment and intellect, Nathan Fletcher. So thank you, Nathan. It's a great privilege and a pleasure at the Union Tribune to be a sponsor of this event. The Union Tribune is San Diego's oldest company, the longest running business in San Diego, and one that is directly tied to the prosperity of the region. So for that reason, I've always been very supportive of this event, and also hugely curious about what we can learn. For those of you who have been here before, you'll know my habit is to look back at last year's forecast to see how we did. Maybe a funny year in which to do that, but I went back and I watched Christopher Thornburg's keynote from last February 7th. Brilliantly done, by the way. Thornburg is really, really good. And perhaps a little unfortunately, his theme was to press against the building sentiment that the recovery, the longest on record, was doomed to trip up and fail at any moment. And Thornburg laid out his case why that would not happen, and he provided this definition: recessions are anomalies caused by a large, rapid, and sustained shock to the system, which I think we are all seeing now. That's a pretty good definition. Interestingly, like Thornburg did have in like one little note of a wild card brewing pandemic, which was a pretty good call. So I loved the questions Nathan was asking. I'm curious to hear the answers, and I'll just close with one other thing that Christopher Thornburg said last year, which was what he saw as the biggest long-term risk to the economy and what she counted as far more significant than his wild cards was this one: political dysfunction and extremism. So that's one that we're facing now in the long term, I think, and even more significantly. And it's a risk that, you know, we see every day in the news, and it's one that has its roots both globally and also locally. So it's something for all of us, I think, to grapple with and to take seriously. So we'll see what the economists have to say. I'm very much looking forward to it. And with that, I'm going to hand us over to Peter Kallstrom. Peter's been the CEO of the Workforce Partnership for 8 years. He is proud to partner with his 75 coworkers and 35 board members to deliver innovative workforce solutions to thousands of job seekers and employers throughout our region. Peter's from Minnesota, always thankful to be in San Diego. I have a similar story, especially during the winter. So Peter, thank you so much. I'll hand it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff, and great to be with everyone. And the turnout today is great already. So looking forward to a really robust conversation. And I want to thank Chairman Fletcher. As he mentioned, he served on our consortium policy board for the past 2 years, and he's added great value in helping steer the direction of the workforce partnership and supporting our efforts. And he's been a great champion for the work that we're doing and the work ahead. So thank you, Chairman Fletcher, for your comments as well, because I think you really hit on some really critical issues that we're faced with. Is the inequity of the impact of the pandemic is really, really sobering. There's great wealth, the trillion that has been added to billionaires, and people at low wages are suffering more than ever, and they have been adversely impacted with layoffs, long-term layoffs, and we have to do everything in our power in order to lift them up and to provide new ways for them to get new skills in order to be most relevant in the future workforce, which we're discovering every day. What's that going to look like? How much has to be all remote? How much can be in person? And we have a long way to go to get out of this pandemic. And again, thanks to Chairman Fletcher and his leadership with Greg Cox and the supervisors in order to really hold on to science and really guide decisions based upon public health. And we really appreciate that, despite the slings and arrows that go your way. So we really appreciate that. And I also want to thank Jeff too, and the Union Tribune for your longstanding support of this great forum. It's really an important way to look forward. And Jeff, I appreciate your looking back, because we have to see what happened. And there were some things there in the prior prognostications that came true, and now we're living in a very new world, and the year ahead is anyone's guess, but our experts are going to be able to really dig deep into seeing what that really looks like. And where we are as the workforce partnership, I really want to emphasize we serve the entire region. We serve and support all employers and all job seekers. So if there's anything that we can do to support anyone in the region, check us out at workforce.org, because we have an array of services and programs and supports for people in all sectors and where you are. We're here to support people to get new skills, to get jobs into this new economy, and we are here for you. So please reach out, workforce.org. And now, I would like to introduce Dr. Timothy Keene. He joined USD School of Business in January of 2020. What an auspicious time, just as the pandemic hit. And with Tim's leadership, the School of Business aspires to embrace business stewardship of our region and the world, which requires businesses to protect and care for society in pursuit of greater good. Here's Dr. Timothy Keene.
Thank you, Peter. We're very proud to be associated with this Economic Roundtable, the 37th. And I just want to say a few words about the University of San Diego and the School of Business as an anchor institution in the region. We've been collaborating with community partners to tackle the economic challenges of our times, with a particular focus on fostering inclusive growth and supporting our local businesses and neighborhoods. Just exactly the kinds of things that we need to embrace going forward in this post-pandemic economy. We have our Brink Small Business Development Center, for example, that supports startups and growth in small businesses in the region. We have our Aller Center for International Business that provides consulting services to local businesses seeking to expand into international markets. And one very special partnership we fostered over the past year is with our regional Chamber of Commerce. In the midst of this pandemic and the global economic crisis, as you know, the Chamber has been laying the foundation for our regional recovery, which is largely what this forum is all about. And to talk more about their efforts, I'd like to welcome Stephanie Benvenuto, the Chamber's Vice President for Public Affairs. And Stephanie and her team work on a variety of legislative and policy positions on behalf of our binational business community at all levels of government. Some of you may not be aware of the reach and impact of the San Diego Regional Chamber, but it's actually the largest local chamber of commerce on the West Coast with 2,500 members, and they represent over 300,000 jobs. And so with that, Stephanie, thanks for all you do for this region, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for allowing me to be a part of today. I am very interested to see kind of what themes pop up, but I think so far we're finding that inequity is a huge theme, a huge question for our recovery. It's one that the Chamber has been looking at. But I think there are a lot of slivers of hope. And that's one thing that we have found through our partnership with the university, through our back in business effort, which was just mentioned. So those partners that are working with us to lay that foundation, to explore those tough questions, to find the policy themes that we need to really tackle are obviously the university, the regional EDC, Tourism Authority, and Deloitte. And we are going to be releasing our publication entitled Back in Business in the very near future, just going through some final tweaks. But I just wanted to kind of preview what that is, because as our binational region really thinks about returning to work and reopening those floodgates, we have found, I think, collectively that the questions that we had before COVID have just come into glaringly into the forefront. You know, we're talking about housing. We're talking about supporting working families who are struggling to afford childcare. We're talking about how to ensure that children are prepared for future workforce, future job questions. And this big digital gap is just staring us in the face now. And so those things are definitely themes that have come through in our Back in Business report. But I think that one thing that COVID has done is really forced us into looking at those key questions about affordability and how to ensure that families are just able to thrive in San Diego. So the report, just a quick preview, is broken down into 3 basic chunks. First is the economic baseline, which has some tentative hope in there. I don't want to say it's all bad news, but authored by Ryan Ratcliff, who I'll preview in just a moment, followed by recommendations and guidance for both businesses who are exploring reopening, possibly a bit of a pivot. I think we're all sick of that word, but still. And then recommendations as well for our policymakers who are looking to help alleviate some of the pressure that businesses are under. And then a couple of spotlights from businesses and organizations that did figure it out. They were able to demonstrate some agility, and there's lessons learned there. And I think that's one thing that we're really trying to show folks is that there is a way forward. There is light at the end of this tunnel, and we want to help folks get there. So in our 150th year, the Chamber is really excited to be doing this work. We're so grateful for our partners, many of whom are here this morning. So thank you for having me. And it's my pleasure to introduce my friend and our keynote today, a major partner in our Back in Business effort, Ryan Ratcliff. He is the Associate Professor of Economics at University of San Diego, specializing in forecasting, financial economics, and macroeconomics, meaning he has a crystal ball and we can all bank on him to tell us exactly what's coming down the pike. 100%. Definitely he's going to be right. No question about it. He's a graduate of, minor places like Stanford and UC Berkeley, no big deal. And I have it on great authority from interns and previous hires at the Chamber that he is a very well-respected, very well-liked teacher. And I think in the economics world, that's probably a tough thing. So Ryan, thanks again for being such an excellent partner and everything you're doing for our business community to really give them some basic facts and something to hold on to as we all kind of look around and go, what is happening? So I'll turn it over to Ryan. Again, thank you for having me.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. It has been my privilege to work with the Chamber on the Back in Business initiative. I'm going to touch on a couple of the themes that we've come up with in our work with the Chamber and Deloitte. But without further ado, let me share my screen here and kick off my presentation here. I always like to start these discussions just with the map that the county provides on a weekly basis. This is just the cumulative positive cases in the various zip codes of San Diego County. Because if we've heard from several of our introductory speakers, one of the themes that you have to have in the forefront of your mind as you're talking about the economic impact of COVID is just how disparate the impact has been, both the impact of the virus itself and the economic impact. And I think this color-coded map just really brings home that every single corner of San Diego County has been significantly impacted by COVID, but the impact is very, very unevenly distributed geographically, along racial and ethnic lines, and also along economic lines. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But I want to start off with just a little bit of a very, very high overview look back at kind of how the economic impact of the pandemic has unfolded. I'm going to try and do double duty today and talk a little bit about the U.S. as a whole, and then predominantly about the San Diego County specifically. To get oriented in this picture, what I've done, first look at both the red and the blue lines here. The red line is a monthly index that's put out by IHS that is essentially U.S. real GDP. And I've indexed the beginning of the pandemic to 100 here, so that basically as both of these lines evolve over time, you can think about kind of in percentage terms where we are relative to February of 2020. So looking at the red line first, which is the US, and then we'll turn to the blue line in a moment, which is San Diego. What we can see is that over the space of 2 months, real GDP contracted by about 15%. Now, unprecedented is probably on my list. Stephanie wanted to put pivot on the list. I want to put unprecedented on the list of words that just don't sort of lost their meaning because we say them so much. But to give you some sense of just how completely outside of our usual experience with a recession that is, that decline in GDP is roughly like taking the entire 2008 financial crisis and compressing it into 2 months. It really is just a staggering blow to the economy relative to anything we've seen before. Now, you can see that we kind of hit bottom in April and had a really strong bounce back kind of in the late spring, Q2 of 2020 with GDP. As we started to see, the other thing in this picture, the gray area there is just the number of new cases of COVID-19 in San Diego County, just to kind of give us a timeline of what's going on with the virus here. And we can see as we sort of rolled into summer and saw, it looks like barely a blip relative to recent numbers, but what we thought of as a surge in the summer, we did see GDP slow down a little bit, but still growing. And, there in October 20, we were back up to, only down about between 2 and 3% of where we were in February. Right. So one of the kind of oddities of the recovery has been that when you look at spending related measures, and GDP is a spending related measure, you look at asset prices as well, where there was an unprecedented calamity in February, March, and April, and we've seen GDP mostly come back. We've seen the stock market actually achieve all-time highs, right? But on the other side, we see that the decline, so the measure I have here for San Diego is actually based on just total non-farm payroll employment here. Again, about a 15% decline in the span of 2 months. Again, staggering, makes the Great Recession look like small potatoes. We can't call the Great Recession anymore after what we've been through this year. But you can see that the recovery in employment in San Diego, again, started off pretty strong. We had a little bit of a negative hiccup there as we rolled into the summer surge again. But by and large, I think the overall trend of the recovery on the employment side One of the things that stands out is it's just not quite as, it's not recovering quite as quickly as the spending-based measures did. And I think that dichotomy between, when you look at spending, you look at asset markets, et cetera, you see one version of a fairly, encouraging recovery. When you look at labor markets, it's a little bit more sobering. That kind of how that both of those can be true at the same time is one of the things I want to kind of explore a little bit. But my main idea here is that I want to use that summer surge as a guide for thinking about what we're going to see here as we roll into 2021. Now, the really daunting thing that we see in this picture, of course, is just the explosion of new cases we've had here in the what you might refer to as a super surge here in November and December. One of the ways I like to give some context to this picture is the number of new cases that we had in December in San Diego County, 75,000 something, I believe, is almost the same as the 80,000 cases we had from March all the way through November. So, we are really in the worst part of the hurricane here, and I want to use a little bit of what we learned about how the economy kind of reacted to a resurgence of the virus in the summer, and use that to sort of think about what we might see in the coming months here. But to turn back a little bit, I want to look at the U.S. as a whole. I had a graph. I've tried 3 or 4 different ways to present this data, and then I found an article in the New York Times that did it way better than I did. So I'm shamelessly plugging their coverage here. I had cited down there at the bottom. But what this is a decomposition of, let's take the period from March to November of 2019, use that as a baseline, and then compare how did incomes change in the United States as a whole between that period in 1919 and the corresponding March to November period in 2020. So on the left, you can see what happened to disposable personal income. You can see a drop in wages relative to the previous year. I don't think that's a surprise, but I do agree with the New York Times call out that I was surprised it wasn't bigger. But what we see here is a whole bunch of additions, and a lot of them came through federal policy. So we can see about $500 billion of income coming from unemployment insurance benefits extended through the CARES Act, another 276 from stimulus checks and so on, and then proprietors' income actually. So this is sort of the small business owners chunk of personal income. Supported by PPP loans and so on. So quite surprisingly, we actually had over $1 trillion of new disposable personal income over this period from March to November of 2020, right? We're sort of thinking that with the unemployment numbers we've seen and so on, that we would expect to see a similar calamity on the income side, but in large part thanks to unemployment benefits and stimulus checks, we actually have seen a pretty significant growth in overall income in the U.S. over the period. So on the right, we have what happened with spending, and it's funny how much these comments exactly reflect what's gone on in my own household. A big part of our Christmas present was an investment in cleaning out the garage and putting in some gym equipment. So increased durable goods purchases, a lot of cooking from home, and meal. Here's a new thing you can cook this week, meals and so on. But, so together, about $99-100 billion in new spending on the goods side of the economy, but offset by, an absolute calamity on the services side of the economy and spending. So, this, the New York Times wants to identify this as just, we're not going on trips anymore, but this is, we're not going out to dinner, we're not getting haircuts, we're not, all of the things that we used to go out and spend money on, face-to-face having services done for us, we've now kind of internalized in the home, and spending has shown that. So you put the two of these together and you get a very, very surprising result, right? So about $1 trillion of new income for households, and households are also spending about $500 million less than they were before. Put that together, that's $1.5 billion of new savings, right? Higher income and you're spending less. In our economics accounting, we call that new national household savings. And so I think that's part of the mystery of why have we seen so much, so much robust activity in asset markets. Why is the stock market so high? Why is the housing market doing so well? It's because there's all this new savings sloshing around, looking for some place to hide and earn some return for investors. Right. So I think this kind of gives us both a window into why the spending side of the economy has largely held up. Thank you to federal emergency action and also, the housing market. But at the same time, it also underscores what happens with the next round of stimulus and what we do with unemployment benefits in these new discussions around stimulus. Part two is going to have a pretty big impact on whether this continues to play out in 2021. Okay, so turning to San Diego, I'm going to do a couple of slides here on what I want to describe as the tale of two economies here. Again, depending on what particular sector you're in, what racial and ethnic group, what income bracket, your experience during the pandemic has been significantly different. So let's start out on the left here. What I've tried to do is, so you'll remember we had the big wipeout in the graph in the first picture on the first slide through January and April. So the bars here are taking a sector by sector look at change in employment over that kind of initial gut punch phase. And as we can see, the job loss was concentrated in just a few sectors: accommodation and food services, the retail sector, kind of non-COVID related healthcare. So think maybe like dentist's office and so on, arts and entertainment and so on. And then the red bar here is giving you where we stand relative to the beginning of the year in the most recent data we have in November. And so you can see for the most part, what we see is that these very, very hard hit sectors have recovered. So let me first talk about why I think it was those sectors that took the brunt of the blow, and then I'll talk a little bit about the recovery bit. So the graph on the right here is just a scatter diagram where we're mapping out similar but not identical sector categories here. The further to the right in the picture you are, the bigger a contributor this sector was to San Diego's gross domestic product back in the last read that we had in 2018. So you can see there's a cluster up here at the top: professional technical services, finance, insurance, information, private education, and so on. But professional technical services in particular, number one, a big contributor to San Diego GDP. But number two, and this is what we're measuring vertically, based on a study done by University of Chicago, it basically went through each of the sectors and asked, how easy is it going to be for this sector to pivot to remote work, right? And what we're finding is that the high tech, management consulting, lawyers, white collar kinds of jobs that live in that professional technical services category had a pretty easy time transitioning to remote. And so when you find that sector over here, relatively little job loss during the early phase of the pandemic. And it is actually one of the sectors that through November has actually added jobs, right? One of the bright spots in our local economy, along with the kind of administrative business services side and construction, as we all get into the business of trying to remodel these houses that we're trapped in right now. But I think when we look for the sectors that suffered the biggest employment impacts, we can see they're right there. Also big contributors to San Diego's GDP. But the common denominator is initially they were viewed as having a much harder time: durable manufacturing, tourism, restaurants, and so on, as having a harder time easily transitioning to socially distanced or remote kind of setting. Now, one of the things I want to say that really has come home in the work that I've been doing with the Chamber of Commerce and Deloitte, this Back in Business initiative, has really just been the innovation that these sectors have shown in sort of coming up with new ways. How do you run a restaurant in a socially distanced world? Right? Well, we move outside, we move to a takeout operation, and so on. So I think it's really you can't sugarcoat how rough 2020 has been for the hospitality industry. But I think these, the difference between that top blue bar and the red bar, we're still suffering. But I really want to take, a little bit of good news and a little bit of encouragement out there that just the innovation that San Diego hospitality businesses have shown in terms of coming up with a way to react to this has been really inspiring. There's still a ways to go. There's still a lot of employment loss in that sector, but I think that is one of the real rays of hope that I would offer in terms of this not being what's been driving the recovery and what we might look at going into 2021. All right, so secondly, just some data here on how the that was a little bit of kind of the sector by sector look and how the job loss has really been concentrated in a few sectors. On the left here in the gray tables, these are data again from the county's weekly COVID watch here. Supervisor Fletcher already alluded to these numbers, so I'll kind of just go through them rapidly here again. That we have, really the number of cases is disproportionately concentrated in the Hispanic and Latino community relative to their share of the overall population here. So one number, that cases as a share of population there, we're often used to talking about per 100,000 residents, but we have so many cases now that we don't need to do that. We can just switch to a number here that really is the staggering 9% of the Hispanic and Latino population of San Diego County has had a positive COVID diagnosis over the from March to our latest data here on the 9th of January. Similar patterns in hospitalizations and deaths. But on the right here is some data. The census does this really great weekly survey that they've never done anything like this before, but they rolled it out, and it's just a gold mine of data related to kind of demographic and socioeconomic disparities here. So two pictures here, just to show you this is within the survey. They asked the California sample, have you lost your employment income sometime since March, right? That's kind of a census code word for basically, have you suffered any sort of job loss? And, one of the things we see here is that the numbers for the Hispanic and Latino community and the African-American community here in San Diego, substantially higher than white and Asian. So just in terms of job loss, disproportionately landing on those two communities. And then the bottom graph here is mapping it out by income bracket. So this is less than $35,000 of household income, and then different buckets all the way up to greater than $200,000 a year of annual household income. And I think this is, it's not a surprise to anybody, but still to see it so starkly here in the data is that the job loss has very disproportionately fallen on lower income households as well. Right. So this is, in the spirit of tale of two economies here, the recession looks a lot different if you are a worker with an advanced degree in one of those professional and technical services categories where you are getting your full paycheck every month and just trying to cope with Zoom issues versus if you are in one of these, lower income brackets, if you're in one of these communities of color, the recession is substantially, the experience of the recession has been substantially worse. And I think that's something we never want to lose sight of here, is just how different the impact has been on our more vulnerable communities. Okay, so looking at the time here, I know I got to wrap up here. I'm in the home stretch. Just want to briefly say that, one of the big issues that we've confronted is that we know that shutting down businesses is going to reduce the transmission of the virus, but who shuts down and when you can come back open, has changed a lot. The guidance has been inconsistent, and that's been a real point of frustration for the business community. And one of the things I think we really want to aspire to is to have that discussion be data-driven, right? Based on science, based on data. That's what everybody says we want. And there's sort of two ways we might look at this. The data that the county publishes on a regular basis is the contact tracing data. So they'll tell you, of a positive COVID case that we interviewed, here's where they've been in the last 2 weeks, where they are willing to report that they've been in the last 2 weeks. And that's helpful up to a point. But, one of the things I really found myself as I was kind of working on that, what is the economic impact of the lockdown, who should be able to open and all that, what I was really wanting was, how many of the outbreaks have occurred at a bar, how many of them have occurred at a church, and so on. And it turns out that the county has been holding that data fairly closely. And their argument, which once I heard it, I understand, is that you do not want to have a chilling effect on contact tracing. You don't want anybody to be in the position of not wanting to tell you where they've been because, say their employer would get mad if they were flagged in a, flagged for the world to see as being responsible for a COVID outbreak. So I understand that, but I think there's a middle ground where we can present the data in a way that helps us discuss, why is this particular set of businesses being closed again? And so I want to give you a window into that. This is this is kind of a, again, rolled up, trying to allow some anonymity, but based on the raw data that was recently obtained by a local news organization, and there's some legal wrangling over this and all, but I think when you roll it up at this level of data, that this actually is a positive contribution to our discussion without having that chilling effect. But you can see here's some data on where the outbreaks have been in San Diego County. And I think this going forward, I would like to see data like this be a lot more of the discussion of, here's the reason we're closing these businesses. Here's the reason these businesses are allowed to be open. I think we've sort of aspirationally said we want it to be data driven. And I think this is a concrete step we can take to make that happen. Okay, sorry. Let me give you my brief final thoughts here. I know I'm a little bit over time. I think based on what we've seen with case numbers here, the first couple of months of 2021 are going to be rough, right? We're going to go at a national level and at a state and local level into a little bit more of a kind of second lockdown mode as we, pray for ICU capacity to free up a little bit, and as we get the virus rolling out, get the vaccine rolling out here a little bit. But again, based on my thought that a lot of the sectors that were forced to shed jobs in the early surges have figured out how to deploy their workforce remotely, how to come up with new innovative business models that deal with the socially distanced requirements. So I think what we're going to see here, again, a little bit of a slowdown, but maybe not as severe as what we've seen in the, what you might expect given the amount of new cases. I think at the same time that's offset by, we know a little bit more how to do business in this new environment. Again, lockdown implementation is a very inconsistent. I don't know whether to listen to Sacramento or our local authorities or the courts, so there's a little bit of a mess about that. But again, I hope here in 2021 that could be a little bit more data-driven discussion. One of the things I was really worried about last year that has proven not to be the case was that the recession was going to put an enormous crater in state and local government finance. And thanks to the spending and the asset market story that we were telling before, that really hasn't been the case. That said, I do think that continuing to have that side of the economy be the one corner of brightness in an otherwise dark story is going to require another, we sort of had that half round of stimulus with the $600 checks, but I think in particular extensions of unemployment benefits are going to be a key part of keeping incomes from contracting in 2021. So that's one of the things I want to advocate for as we roll into a new national political administration. And I think if we can hunker down for a little bit, and take the wind out of this surge. There's been some indications just in the last couple of days that hospitalizations at the state level are slowing down. So my hope is we can kind of get through this in the next strain on the healthcare system in the next 3 or 4 weeks. And if we can get through that and kind of at the same time get to the point where the vaccine snowball starts rolling in the right direction, if we can just get through this first couple of months here, in the hunkered down mentality as the vaccine starts to be more widely distributed. And one of the things I saw that was just this morning was, mentioned on one of the business channels that, are doing a survey of consumers and said, so once the vaccine's kind of taken hold and we think that, lockdowns and whatnot are going to ease, what's your reaction going to be? And it was some ridiculous 85% of people said they're going to go out and splurge. I'm going to go to Disneyland for a week and then I'm going to go on a 3-month world tour. So, if we kind of look past the immediate dark clouds, I think as we get into the second half of 2021 and early 2022, that we may actually see something very similar to what we saw at the end of the Spanish flu pandemic 100 years ago, and maybe are in for the roaring 2022s. So sorry for going over a little bit over time there. Let me stop my screen share and I will hand it back to Daniel to kick off our panel. And I'm happy if you have any questions about that whirlwind tour, I'm happy to try and address them in our Q&A a little bit later.
Great. Thank you so much, Ryan. You took a little extra time, but it was time well spent. I feel like we all learned a ton from that presentation. Thank you so much. And now I'm going to kind of introduce a panel session. We are so fortunate today to have a kind of a star-studded cast of panelists. We have Carrie Capich, COO of the San Diego Tourism Authority. We have Carmen Noor, the Executive Director of the Biocom Institute. We have Misty Rusk, the Founding Director of the Free Enterprise Institute at the University of San Diego. And unfortunately today, Taylor Eubanks is unable to join us. She had a family emergency this morning, but I will try to share some insights that I gleaned from her in a conversation last night. So why don't we just start by addressing this kind of point that Ryan brought up, which is that this is a tale of two cities, maybe a tale of 8 to 10 to 12 cities. A lot of different industries are experiencing growth or contraction. And so why don't we just take turns, give us a sense of what the people you're working with are experiencing and what they expect to experience going into the near future. Carrie, can we start with you with all the rosy news about the tourism industry?
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Ryan and I have been on many economic panels, and the conversation has been really quite depressing in many ways. So it is a real challenge when you have this situation of stop-start for leisure and hospitality businesses. So it's been a difficult time. As you saw through the presentation, that sector, our sector, has had the largest unemployment. So 37% unemployment, 77,000 jobs that have been lost. And you have business owners, many small business owners who are really struggling, trying to figure out how to be sustainable in this kind of environment when they don't understand the rules and the rules keep changing on them. So one of the things that we really hope to see happen is we have led an effort working with all of the industry sectors that make up leisure and hospitality. It's the third largest industry for San Diego, and it's everything from transportation to attractions, to museums, to entertainment, to venues, to hotels, to restaurants. And we worked collectively to submit to the state reopening guidelines. We worked with the county's reopening team. And unfortunately, the state's not responded back with what those reopening guidelines should be. And so people don't know what to expect and what to do. And that is something that we're really hoping will come out of some of these conversations, is that please let people know what to plan for once we get to the point where we can reopen. We need a plan to reopen. So at this point in time for tourism, last year we lost 50% of revenues for the industry sector. Tax revenues for local government are down dramatically. You saw Todd Gloria, our mayor, in his State of the City address yesterday, talk about the city is in a fragile state because tourism revenues are the third largest revenue stream, tax revenue stream for this city. So it's good that the data is favorable for the county and for the state, but cities are really hurting and they will need support from the state and from the federal government because the monies that come into the city are for essential services. And obviously, as we're trying to maneuver through all of this, we're very eager to be able to come out of the situation that we're in, to be able to get back to having some of our businesses be able to open for activities that they've been doing safely. You just saw that in terms of the data that was presented by Ryan in terms of very low numbers when you're talking about activities like hotels and resorts. That's not the problem that we've been facing within our community. It's really been community activities in private homes. So we're really hopeful that there can be more attention provided to the sector. It's been impacted severely, and we need support from elected leaders and recognition of the challenges that we face. At this point for travel and tourism, we're looking at a 5-year recovery horizon. And as we all know, it's through travel and tourism that we have healthy air service into our market, the ability to, take travel and flights in and out of San Diego easily. It's providing tax revenues for parks and recreation, for police and city services, jobs. And those jobs are important jobs. When you think about jobs for every type of skill level, language level, and the ability to start a career, travel and tourism jobs over 52% are earning a middle class living or higher. So there's a great career path there. We need to get those jobs as much as we can back and make sure that San Diego has a robust economy with lots of different options for many people.
Yeah, thanks. Misty, tell us a little bit about what you do and what your experience has been during the pandemic and what you're expecting this year.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. It's great to be here today. I would just say I work in the innovation and startup space. I've done that for about 20 years. I've been with University of San Diego the last 3 years. USD's accelerator, the Brink SBDC, serves 1,100 startups in the San Diego region. So we represent about 12% of the total number of startups. And USD's has a number of programs in the space, entrepreneurship, innovation space, doing a lot of different kinds of things. I think your connection to the Tale of Two Cities, is the best of times, it was the worst of times, is exactly the right thing. So different from Carrie and what's happening with tourism, we're really seeing something unprecedented, certainly the best word for it, certainly unprecedented since March. So month of March, our services went down to almost zero. We didn't see anybody. What we realized later is people were just hunkering down, reestablish the fort and, sustain. And then in April, we had a 50% increase above our highest record number of hours of consulting in a given month. So it's dramatically different. If you think back to the slide 2 that Ryan shared this morning, of course, I'm always looking for the space where I play. That one little line, professional, scientific, technical services, that there's a 5,000 new jobs in that space. But we're really seeing huge diversity in that space. So of course, anything that touches virology, we've got all kinds of funding, all kinds of growth in that space. What you don't expect is where that money comes from. All of the research in oncology, money that's typically been focused on cancer, heart disease, all of that money went away and got retasked for virology. We also see other things with all of the employment changes and uncertainty, insurance, anything in HR, benefits, SaaS platforms, hard goods. like all of those industries are increasing. And so what we're seeing really is a full division. We're either, it's the worst economic situation, the worst potential situation for a startup, or the very best. And we see a couple of other things that are happening with that at the same time. So we're seeing actually an increase in the number of startups. People are laid off. So, you get scrappy and you say, what can I do to feed my family? And I've always kind of wanted to start this thing and I've got time on my hands. Maybe I can make it go. And there's certainly the environment these days is helpful to that. There's all kinds of free resources online and everywhere else. Like you can build an MVP if you're building software with almost no money. And then, that's probably, we see a lot of that. We're also seeing a lot of people coming back to school, technical training, get out from under your school loans if you re-enroll in classes, some of those kinds of things too. So it's a little bit of all over the place, but certainly interesting times.
Thanks. Carmen, tell us about biotech.
Absolutely. So, as many industries are industries also facing headwinds, but as shared by some of the speakers, the industry is one of the bright spots in our county and one of the sectors experiencing growth. So today, the life sciences companies are at the forefront of combating COVID-19 by developing the vaccines, tests, treatments, and the industry, as well as academic and research institutions, are all playing an important role. It's an effort that's being led by researchers, technicians, scientists, and others in the life science community. Those who work for companies that are directly involved in developing products to fight coronavirus are busier than ever. And these companies are also hiring with renewed vigor in the county. For those whose work is not directly relevant to this crisis, work has also typically continued, while those who are mostly at a desk are continuing their work from home. Another marker of growth for the life sciences in the San Diego region is that construction goes on. There's a lot of construction and activity, specifically in the downtown area around Horton Plaza and Barcadero, with approximately 1,700 life science establishments in the county. Many continue to add jobs even during the coronavirus outbreak in roles such as, lab technicians, quality control technicians, data specialists, accountants, paralegals, software engineers, just to name a few. So there's a lot of need for skilled life sciences workforce in San Diego. And we also believe that displaced workers from other industries can also play an important part of the talent pipeline for the industry. So now is a time to consider either reskilling, upskilling for jobs in the industry. And we have several great programs at our local community colleges. For example, at MiraCosta or Miramar College, they have certificate programs and degree programs that are providing the technical and the scientific training for these jobs. So at Biocom California and Biocom Institute, we're really focused on how do we grow a talent pipeline to support this growing and thriving industry, but in a way that works for the people of San Diego.
Thanks, Carmen. So I'll try to briefly kind of share a bit of a perspective that Taylor shared with me last night when we talked by phone. Taylor is at Tesla, and she's overseeing a nationwide surge in hiring for solar installers. And she mentioned, I know that, for example, Tesla is working with the San Diego Workforce Partnership to employ 100 to 150 solar installers in San Diego. And her experience is that in utilities and construction, as we saw from Ryan, those are expanding jobs. And one of the things that I think is interesting when we look at all of these industries together is, Carrie really talked about a huge challenge that we have an entire segment of the population that's out of work because of the challenges around COVID. And one of the things that I'm interested to know is, where do we see the opportunities for those people to be employed? And certainly, Carrie, if you have experience seeing folks find jobs elsewhere, I'd be interested in that. I know, Carmen, we talked about this a little bit, and Misty, you mentioned people, kind of starting businesses. But if you have thoughts on that, I know that was one of the things that Taylor really emphasized was that's construction is an area, and solar installing, and some of these roles where they don't require a ton of education, and it's a good place for people who may have been working in lower wage jobs that are gone now.
Yeah, so I'll share a little bit about from the Tourism Authority. We obviously went through a significant staff reduction based on loss of revenues. And what we saw with team members who were able to go and to find other jobs, some of them were able to do so within the healthcare system. So for example, digital marketing team members were able to go work for a healthcare company. We had some team members who decided to go back to school and get educated and get a degree in another field, thinking that maybe leisure and hospitality as a sector wasn't for them. We have others who are still out of work because their experience is so geared towards the travel industry. So it really kind of depends on the type of job you have. If you are someone who's working at a hotel, you might be a general manager. You might be an engineer overseeing operations at that facility. You might be an HR professional. You might be a banquet server. It really depends on the type of job and then what other opportunities are available for you. And so it's been very much a mixed bag. The harder part is if you're a small business owner and you're based here in San Diego, what do you do? So for example, Surf Cup Sports, which many people don't know, but they are doing soccer tournaments. They do them throughout San Diego and other parts of Southern California. Small business, they do about 10 events locally each year, 120 million in economic impact. They've had to move their events outside of California in order to continue to do those events, or literally shut down a business that they've had for years. So it's a little bit harder when it's your own business. Where do you go? What do you do if you're not allowed to operate? And so, obviously you do see some businesses now in California choosing to leave California. And that's another reality we'll all have to deal with.
Yeah. Carmen, thoughts on this game of musical chairs and how many people can we, who are, getting played out of their chair in the tourism industry, how many of those people is it realistic that we're going to be finding spaces for in biotech and other industries?
Sure. Well, I don't have an exact number, but I will say that there is a lot of opportunity, and a lot of it is about, retraining or even just providing awareness of what those possibilities are in the life sciences industry, because our industry needs employees in all functional areas, not just in the traditional scientist roles or bench jobs. So it's how can we work, as Biocom Institute with the Workforce Partnership, with our education partners, to make sure that there's awareness of the possibilities of jobs and careers in our industry.
Yeah. That's something that Taylor also emphasized was, they're in every market that they're in, they're working with local workforce development boards, because the workforce development boards know who needs jobs and they know what kind of training they need. And so that kind of partnership allows them to kind of almost outsource finding the people who they need and then working with them to get the training that they need. Misty, I'm curious about, one of the things that's changed so much in this pandemic is childcare, and kids not being in school and not having access to childcare. And I'm curious about, is that impacted at all the people who you work with who are business owners, who are starting up businesses, and having to be mom, dad, business entrepreneur, et cetera? Is that have you seen anything around that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Certainly, with moving things to Zoom and everybody operating in this virtual environment, I've met a whole bunch of people's kids. Never have had that happen. And, we're all becoming much more flexible with each other in that way. There's just a a certain amount of grace, which maybe points back to a bigger issue. You know, like right when the pandemic started, I think we did a good job of checking in on each other. And, you know, from a, just like in the broadest sense, is from, you know, from a perspective of stewardship, it's something we need to keep doing, right? So I'm fortunate, my kids are all grown. You know, in this pandemic, I became an empty nester, which is a super weird thing to have happen. But I'm watching my colleagues who have little ones at home and realizing, you know, I'm watching people walk through complicated financial models with a toddler who's jumping around in their lap. USD implemented its first childcare program. So we're seeing some of the anchor institutions, bigger companies look for creative ways. And then we're seeing all kinds of creative solutions to education. So school pods and a whole variety of things like that.
Thanks. Carmen, I know you have some experience with some of your clients on this subject.
Absolutely. Yes, some of the biotech life science companies are also having to think creatively about how to address the childcare needs. And I think it's something that we all need to address as we're thinking about reopening the economy. And even those that, you know, who still have jobs, many are still grappling with the challenges of childcare. But we're seeing that women are suffering more from employment loss. And when you look at, you know, even women of color, they're not faring, you know, any better. So how do we work with each other to come up with those creative solutions to make sure that we're addressing childcare and making sure that women, that mothers, that caregivers are a part of the conversations for solutions as we're thinking about childcare.
Yeah. One of the things that is unusual about this recession, as opposed to every other recession in modern American history, is that it's actually affected women's employment more than it's affected men's employment, which is exactly the opposite of the way it usually works. And also, as we heard from Ryan, you know, employment has been particularly hard hit among communities of color. And at the same time, you know, we've had a lot of very nice PR statements released in the wake of the murder of George Floyd about Black Lives Mattering and commitments to equity and diversity. And I just wanted to ask all three of you if you have encountered any experience of, you know, people taking steps to really follow those statements up with action, and whether that's something that we should look forward to in 2021, whether there's going to be real action around racial and gender equity, or whether it's business as usual. Feel free to jump in, anybody.
I'll go ahead and start. Daniel, it's a good point. You know, there's certainly been a lot of conversation about it. USD had a plan to increase diversity in its employment, you know, long before this, but we spent a lot more time talking about it. Some of the big federal programs through the CARES Act, PPP, EIDL, those leveled the playing fields in some ways. We had some early course corrections. So as part of the Small Business Development Center system, we track that kind of information very carefully. We realized in the immediate aftermath, we saw far fewer people of color applying for those loans. And in our efforts to get the information out, we were doing a lot of Zoom meetings and didn't realize that for poor communities, access to quality internet and high bandwidth is a real issue. And we actually weren't properly serving some of those. So we doubled back, delivered more of that training on regular old conference calls, eliminated the internet thing as we are at the simultaneously, the communities are really engaged in trying to figure out how to improve that access. And we saw those numbers come up where they should. So in some ways, the CARES funding has leveled the playing field a little bit. Certainly there has been a long standing, and we continue to work in the angel investing space on unconscious bias. It's always an issue with it being elevated, you know, at a society level. We're offering more of that kind of training and more engagement. I can say for the San Diego Angel Conference, the last 2 years, that conference has funded 6 companies. 5 of those winners have been women. 4 of them are diverse founders. So, we are doing some good work in this space. We're not close to parity. We're not nearly where we want to be. There's a lot more work to do, but I do feel like it's giving us an opportunity to make significant progress.
I can add to that. In the life sciences, around diversity has emerged as an important theme in conversation with life science executives, specifically as we saw in our California Workforce Trends report over the last few years. Biocom Institute, we also recently issued a survey and report looking at this issue of uncovering the current state of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the life sciences industry. And there's just broad recognition within the industry that we must and can do more. And most of the life science companies may have formal diversity programs in place, but I'd admit that they have tended to be focused on gender. And again, there's more to do, but there's more and more of an acknowledgement that more has to be done to support underrepresented communities, to focus more on equity and inclusion. And that work has really begun to shift over the last few months. So we're working with partners with the Biocom California membership to see how we can better support life science companies with their efforts and increase the number of representation and access and inclusion specifically for Black, Latinx, and Indigenous people in our industry. And we believe that it's not just about creating diversity, but how do we sustain it and how do we build an inclusive workplace to do that? And so we think that that's a workplace where there's a culture of accountability, of giving and receiving feedback, where there are clear pathways for growth, opportunities for professional development, and a workplace that recognizes the value of individuals with diverse backgrounds, talents, experiences, and perspectives. So again, there's just a lot of work to be done there, but we're at a point now in our industry where it's important to acknowledge that we have work to do, but also having the difficult conversations and understanding that a one-off training is just not going to do it.
I'm curious, one last question before we bring Ryan back and join this whole panel and we can do some Q&A, all of us. Are we going to stay remote? And that's kind of the big prognostication question on everybody's mind is, how is this going to affect our economy, both in terms of where people live and just how the experience of work is for individuals. Are we going back once everything is, once COVID is taken care of? Are we going back, or is it never going to be the same? And so I'm just curious if any of you have views on that.
I think it's going to be a mix, right? So I think you have an opportunity in some cases where the work remote and work from home has actually been productive and has been sustainable. I think some industries can obviously adapt better than others. I think some workers want more face time and interaction with one another, especially millennials who are trying to, join in and create culture. So it's really going to be a mix. And I think every business is going to have to take a look at what works for them. So I think it's kind of fun to see where we go with it. I don't think there'll be hard and fast rules per se.
Yeah, if I look into my crystal ball, my purely opinion here, I don't think things will ever be the same. I think if you look back, somebody mentioned earlier today how travel's never been the same. I think it was Supervisor Fletcher. Travel's never been the same since 9/11. If you look back to the 1972 3-day freeze on beef futures, changed the beef industry. It hasn't recovered. It's almost 50 years later. I don't think things will be the same. I think we get to design the new future. I think we have a lot of opportunities to be creative in how we go forward. But I don't think we'll ever all come back to work the way we used to.
That's true for biotech and life sciences as well. The industry had to adapt quite quickly to ensure that the work continued, but also that employee health was protected. And so having to reimagine these new structures of remote work just means that people in our industry will have to be greater experts at planning, communicating, at increasing their digital fluency skills. And again, we anticipate seeing hybrid models for remote work in the future.
Well, thanks everybody. And why don't we bring Ryan back on, and we'll kind of enter into a broader Q&A here. I think the first thing that I'm curious to know about from all of your perspectives is, Ryan mentioned that government budgets haven't been hit as hard as expected, but certainly Mayor Todd Gloria last night gave his State of the City address, and he said, we're 150 million in the hole, which is like the entire Parks and Rec budget for the year. So, Ryan, where do we stand economically? And then all of you, do you see an impact of government budgets, and also in the shift in, say, the ideological makeup of our local governments? What's the role that you see of government in the coming year?
Well, I guess let me start out by, I kind of briefly drove by at 55 miles an hour, the tip of a very deep iceberg. Carrie did clean it up for me a little bit, but I guess let me clarify that whether you're talking about national, state, or local government, the key thing is what is the big driver of your tax revenue. So for instance, at the state level, California is very reliant on income taxes, and in particular, we have a very progressive system, so we are reliant on what happens to incomes at the high end of the income distribution. So a booming stock market means that state income tax revenue is going to be in good shape. And I think when you listen to what's been coming out of Sacramento recently, it's been a lot of, we weren't expecting to have this much money. What are we going to do with it, right? So I was talking to some folks at Sandag yesterday, and they were very positively surprised by sales tax revenue, right? Because that's their slice that funds some of the transportation things that they're thinking about. Partially because of recent court decisions about how online sales can be taxed, but also just because of that shift that I mentioned from service consumption back to goods consumption. Those sales are easier to tax. And so, again, it was a positive surprise in sales tax revenue. But 100% our city absolutely agree, and I should have mentioned it at the outset. So again, thanks, Carrie, for cleaning that up for me. That at the city level, occupancy tax and other taxes that are based on tourism flows, are absolutely in bad shape. And one of the drums that I like to bang at every opportunity is one of the things that the federal government is supposed to do. And in fact, if you're looking at kind of spending $1 on stimulus, where do you get the most bang for the buck for it? Backstopping state and local budgets, because those tend to have big holes in recession. And in many places, you're actually required to run a balanced budget. So as your revenue goes down, you have to dial back your spending as well. Support of state and local governments to help keep school funding from cratering, et cetera, is one of the best things that you can do with stimulus dollars at the federal level, rather than mailing checks to everybody. So,
anyone else have thoughts on government and the economy?
Well, I would like to say, I think from a policy perspective going forward, my hope would be that government doesn't tax certain industries unfairly to try and make up revenues. So if you look at the local city governments, most are reliant upon hotel taxes to fill their coffers. And that's adding taxes onto an industry that's been decimated through this pandemic. So there's got to be other ways to look at revenue generation beyond the one industry that typically gets hit hard, which is the lodging industry. And the reason why that typically gets done is because you're taxing people who are not your voters. So there's got to be other ways to go at it. And City of San Diego has been very reliant on those visitor taxes, and they're going to need to think about how to broaden for other fees across other industry sectors, because you can't keep going after one sector over and over again, especially when that sector is on its knees and decimated.
Yeah. Carmen, Misty, any thoughts, or shall we move on?
Well, of course, as a good capitalist, I'm always in favor of efficiency. That's not a political statement. I just think everybody's, governments are just like everybody else. They've got budget, tightening that's happening. And this is the great time to look and say, like, how do we prioritize the things that are really important? People that don't, it's easy to say, like, you just need to, tighten your belts a little bit. But the demand for services is so much higher. At the same time, the revenue sources are going down for government. And so I think we all have some responsibility to say, like, how can we each play a more active role? How can we support our officials in making those tough decisions? And, how can we be supportive as we reprioritize spending and look for those other sources? I totally agree with Carrie. We can't, that tourism, like our organization benefits from that as well. We got a grant, a TOT grant from both city and county, and those funds just immediately went away. So
yeah, I really appreciate you saying that, Misty, because there's payroll data that suggests that employment among high income earners, so anybody making over $60,000 a year, was fully recovered in San Diego by June 1st. And it's still 30% below compared to January. And it's still 30% below, employment is still 30% below its January high for low wage earners, which is anybody making less than 27,000. So, as somebody whose job has been preserved through this pandemic because I can work from home, I think I have an obligation, and I think we all have obligations, to think about how do we use the resources that we do have to support people whose jobs have been taken away. So I just encourage everyone to think about that. Those of us who are fortunate enough to have those continuing income, what do we do about that? That leads me to a related question. Ryan, is it a good idea for the government to be giving $2,000 to every American when savings is already so high? I mean, is that a practical economic policy?
Oh boy. So what I will say is that I think fiscal stimulus in general, absolutely, with interest rates where they are, with the potential plummet in spending and the kind of chain reaction of negative, lower spending, lower income, lower spending, lower income, with employment all in there. I think fiscal stimulus, absolutely. I think when you're mailing a check to somebody, who, like you said, I've moved to Zoom, but my income is the same as it was before, and I'm at the high end of the income spectrum as well. Previous studies of these stimulus checks say that, well, yeah, I don't spend it. I put it in, I pay off some debt, or I put it into the financial markets and so on. And that doesn't really, do the goal that the fiscal stimulus is trying to do. Now, I will say that providing that sort of same stimulus to, targeted to people who have lost their jobs, so whether it's via unemployment insurance or whether it's just via more targeted stimulus checks, again, the data suggests in previous recessions that has a very high, again, multiplier effect associated with it. So, I think, back to my point again, I think channeling some of those dollars into helping state and local governments continue to provide services as their revenues shrink is another high bang for the buck use of those resources. But the politics of should we do it with higher government spending or lower taxes or tax rebates and all of that is often often overwhelms any discussion about the relative multipliers on this type of spending or that type of spending.
Yeah. Okay, well, if Nancy Pelosi is listening, Ryan and I have agreed to forego our $2,000 checks. So there's a question that was brought up at the very beginning here by one of our attendees who said, who asked particularly about, I think, pointedly at the tourism industry. So they said, given our pandemic experience going forward, will San Diego think harder about the resiliency of industries we promote? Maybe we shouldn't be expanding tourist businesses because they provide mostly low wages instead of encouraging higher income industries. So I'm just, Carrie might have some thoughts about this.
One of my favorite conversations. Well, it's interesting because about 20% of Americans had their first job in travel and hospitality. My first job was waiting tables in high school. My son is currently working at the front desk of a hotel. It's a great way if you want to work part-time. It's a great opportunity to start a career path. It's a great way to learn soft skill set, which helps you regardless of what career you go into. So the nice thing about leisure and hospitality is it's jobs for every skill set, every language capability, and there's opportunity to grow into any type of field you want. So when we take a look at some of the data out of US travel, the average career salary for those who had their first job in travel and tourism is $82,000 a year. That's higher than those that had their first job in manufacturing or construction or healthcare. And when you take a look at travel jobs, as I mentioned earlier, it's everything from an entry level or a banquet server or a housekeeper to a general manager. And you have a wide diversity of options. So I do think the career opportunities are great and probably more robust than people think. On the other side of it too, from a tourism promotion perspective, having a healthy tourism community is good. It builds critical infrastructure. It makes San Diego a great place for bringing business to and attracting talent. So by having the type of place we have, we talk a lot about San Diego is a great place to live, work, and play. And so we're very fortunate that it is one of the pillars of our economy, but it's not the only pillar. And by having a diverse economy, we're able to provide a lot of opportunity for many people, many interests, many skill sets, and really do a good job of benefiting the overall community. So I don't think it's a one or the other. I think it's trying to make sure that you have a healthy ecosystem, and tourism is part of that healthy ecosystem.
Thanks. Yeah. I have one last question. We're supposed to end at 10:30, so sorry. I have one last question, which is really for anybody who's attending today who maybe has some say in their organization about how they're responding to the challenges of COVID, how they're responding to the need for greater racial and gender equity. If any of you have any practical experiences, any examples of folks that you work with who you said, wow, they did this and that really helped and that was a creative idea. I think it'd be fun to kind of end with maybe some practical, tangible ideas for how people can be adapting in 2021 to the challenges that we face.
That's a tough one. You didn't get, I didn't see that question and have it like a week to think about it. So I appreciate, I would have, that's a really great one. I'd say—
I like to catch you off guard, Misty.
It is, it's fine. I think there's a really simple, beautiful thing we can all do. Slow down, pay attention to what's going on around you, spend some time, we're all secluded and rather maybe than focus on our loneliness, right? Because we're all experiencing that in some way. Maybe it's the good chance to, reflect, look back at, as a little kid, what did you really love? How would you have spent your days if you had no parameters? And then how could you create your workspace where you could do more of that, right? So that there's a beautiful sentiment about do what you love and the money will follow. Right. So there's a piece like that. And I really think it's important for us to take care of each other. So I saw in the chat, George Lanning, I'm just going to give a shout out to George, increase your tip to your servers You know, I've been just checking in on the lady who used to do my nails, and you know, and I sent Christmas gifts to my hairdresser, and you know, a few of the, to the mailman. He got a, something that we did a little bit of extras that way for all of the people that are probably more affected than some of us. You know, we all have, whether it's cash or just kindness, we all could do a little bit more to be taking care of each other right now.
Can I just ditto what Misty said? Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Just try and take care of each other. I mean, at the end of the day, let's try and help each other move through this and be more aware of, it's not one person versus another person. We're all in this together. We all have to help each other move through it. And let's, be good, be kind, share nicely, like everything you learned in kindergarten, essentially.
I echo those sentiments, but we're also seeing some of the successful individuals or companies are the ones that are embracing innovation or agility or thinking creatively, reimagining the future of work, and not thinking about how work was done, before the pandemic, but rather being open to this new notion of the new normal. And as we think about, new technologies emerging and the rapid change that will continue to fuel emerging talent needs. So like Carrie said, let's focus on those transferable skills, helping people acquire the transferable skills that are going to make them successful in any career that they decide to pursue.
Well, thanks everybody. This has been a delightful experience, and I hope that everybody in the audience has enjoyed it as much as I have. I just really appreciate everyone, Nathan Fletcher, Peter Kallstrom, everybody who has helped make this happen. The University of San Diego. This has been a real treat. Stephanie, thanks so much. Neil. So. Thank you, everybody. And we'll send out an email to everyone who participated with a recording of the event in case you just can't wait to rewatch it. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.